December 14, 1941. The North Atlantic, a cold, familiar arena, was home to Germany's U-boat fleet, but for the crew of one such vessel, this day would shatter all notions of home and routine. What began as an ordinary patrol was irrevocably altered by a single, highly encrypted radio message. The communications officer, the second watch officer, struggled with the indecipherable text. A signal of deviation, a profound shift in strategy, was buried within its layers. The underlying cause for this perilous mission was attributed, as was so often the case, to the Führer's directives. A higher command, detached from the brutal realities of combat, issued orders that would place these men in an environment of unknown and insurmountable threats. The boat was supposed to return to its base port, but as the garbled code was finally broken, a new port of call emerged. La Spezia, Italy, the implicit destination, the Mediterranean Sea. For the crew, the realization was a shock. La Spezia meant the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean meant the treacherous Strait of Gibraltar. The navigator, usually a stoic presence, could not hide the grim truth. Half the British fleet, the commander would later grimly state, is around Gibraltar. The Allied naval presence there was immense, a choke point defended with lethal precision. Operating in the Mediterranean, with its tight aerial surveillance and numerous enemy land bases, presented a far greater threat than the vast, if perilous, Atlantic. The shift was more than just geographical, it was psychological. The U-boat, once a self-reliant fighting unit, was now a mere tool of strategic dictates. Their home port, their planned return, erased. The chief, a veteran nearing the end of his career, had planned leave for his wife's imminent childbirth. These new orders intruded into the most intimate spheres of personal life. His resignation and concern for his family were palpable. The immediate consequence of these orders was a detour to Vigo, Spain, for fuel oil. This diversion, necessitated by the extended mission, underscored the disruption and a growing sense of abandonment or unconventional strategy. The journey to Vigo was approximately 250 miles from their position. En route to Vigo, a harrowing encounter served as a visceral premonition of the dangers ahead. A raft of dead sailors, their yellowed skin, black hair, and the horrifying detail of seagulls having pecked away everything soft. These were not naval personnel but civilians, their old-fashioned life jackets suggesting a merchant vessel, collateral damage in the relentless naval war. This discovery was a profound illustration of the human cost of war and the potential fate awaiting the crew in the Mediterranean. The crew's morale plummeted. Fear, anger, and a sense of being expendable pawns of a higher strategy replaced their previous resolve. For decades, the narrative of German U-boat operations often focused on their perceived dominance in the Atlantic. However, this sudden deployment revealed profound vulnerabilities and challenged any notion of infallible high command decisions, especially those that disregarded the well-being of those at the front. Approaching the Spanish coast, the commander became urgent. "In 2 hours it'll be dark," he declared. "That's when we'll run in one way or another." The entry into Vigo harbour had to be clandestine, under the cover of darkness, preferably underwater through the northern entrance. The need for secrecy was paramount, even in a neutral port. The night air of Vigo, however, carried an unexpected scent: oil. Their provisioning ship, the Weser, a German merchant vessel, awaited them. Around midnight, under a necklace of lights that betrayed the harbour's activity, they made their rendezvous. The operation was tense, clandestine. A tiny point of light, a small flashlight, was their primitive signalling method. The exchange, Anton, Anton, followed by BUENVIAAJE. The U-boat, damaged and running on limited resources, relied on materials they had on board for repairs. The provisioning provided a temporary morale boost, a brief respite from the harsh realities of war. The Weser's saloon, opulent with snow-white tablecloths, flowers, polished panelled walls, and thick carpets, offered a stark contrast to their claustrophobic existence. Fresh sausages, boiled pork, every kind of fruit, even pineapples and unlimited oranges, were a luxury almost unimaginable. But the relief was fleeting. 2 shadowy figures, vultures, as the narrator called them, representing the clandestine world of intelligence gathering, joined them. It was here that a chilling discovery was made. Spanish matchboxes, left by earlier U-boat crews, a potential security leak. This seemingly minor detail raised serious doubts about the secrecy of the resupply operation. 3 boats had already been supplied here, 2 were lost. The implication was clear. Allied intelligence might be aware of this clandestine lifeline. The commander, the old man, despite his disheveled appearance, displayed pragmatism and stoicism. His face, weather-beaten and grim, betrayed the immense pressure he was under. The chief, however, showed deep disappointment. His request, and the narrator's, to transfer off the boat for medical or personal reasons were denied. They were forced to confront their immediate future aboard the damaged U-boat. The unrelenting nature of their service, this 13th patrol coming right after the 12th without any leave, was a heavy burden. The Weser's captain, by contrast, was surprisingly comfortable and generous, his demeanor a stark reminder of the grim reality faced by the U-boat crew. The Weser's Flettner rudder, a significant advantage for maneuverability, was also noted, a technical detail highlighting the constant interplay of innovation and operational need. In the face of potential compromise, the decision was made: depart Vigo earlier than planned, deviate from the recommended exit route. This was a shift from planned execution to reactive crisis management. The passage through Gibraltar, their next objective, was framed as an almost insurmountable obstacle race. It emphasized the high stakes of their new, unwelcome mission. The idealized portrayal of wartime supply operations was replaced by the gritty, tense reality of navigating neutral waters under constant threat of discovery. The personal anxieties, doubts, and physical deterioration of the command and crew began to truly manifest. After breakfast, the commander began to explain his audacious plan for passing the Strait of Gibraltar. This was not merely a navigational challenge. It was a death trap. 7 miles separated the African coast from the British docks at Gibraltar. British naval facilities, aircraft patrols, ASTIC, and numerous patrol vessels formed a formidable barrier. Half the fleet, the old man observed again. But the strait held a secret, a geological anomaly that the commander intended to exploit. The high evaporation and low rainfall in the Mediterranean led to increased salinity. This created a unique dual current system. The surface waters flowed in, but a deeper, denser layer flowed out into the Atlantic. The strait was also remarkably deep, up to 3,200 feet, offering ample space for a submerged passage. The commander's plan was unorthodox: to sink horizontally, to drift silently on the deep outward current, letting the natural flow carry them past the defenses. The chief, a seasoned subordinate, initially feigned doubt, allowing the commander to articulate the brilliance of his maneuver. The narrator, an observant crew member, realized the genius of it. It transformed a seemingly impossible situation into a daring tactical stroke. This tactic offered no protection against ASTIC, the primary sonar detection method, but the sheer depth and the silent drift presented a novel challenge to the Allied anti-submarine technology. The proper display of enemy navigation lights would paradoxically aid the commander's maneuvering, providing points of reference in the deadly darkness. Less than half an hour after entering the strait, the first aircraft was sighted. An immediate activation of danger, a shift from strategic planning to tactical evasion. The commander decided to run on electric motors, an unconventional tactic for surface travel to maintain silent running. At 20.30 hours, ship's time, they were running on electrics, a desperate attempt to evade detection in extreme proximity to enemy patrols. This passage tested not only technical ingenuity, but also psychological resilience. The crew's anxiety was palpable, visible in nervous tics and dark humor. The narrator's internal monologue about Simone, his lover, introduced a subplot that questioned the nature of loyalty and deception, adding a personal layer to the military narrative. It was a poignant contrast to the life-and-death struggle unfolding beneath the waves. The success of this daring plan strongly suggested the U-boat successfully navigated the Strait of Gibraltar. It underscored the effectiveness of unconventional thinking in overcoming established defenses. For decades, the history of naval warfare often highlighted brute force and established doctrine, yet this event demonstrated that intelligence and unconventional tactics could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The Mediterranean, their new operational theater, had been reached, but only days later the U-boat faced an even more catastrophic event. A sudden, unexplained explosion rocked the vessel, dreadfully catching the narrator in the knees. deafening him. Initially attributed to artillery, then a B-1 aircraft, it was later determined to be a direct hit beside the tower, severely damaging the U-boat. This was no ordinary attack. It was a cascade of failures. The main cannon was immediately lost, rendering the U-boat vulnerable. Breaches appeared in multiple compartments. The forward hydroplanes jammed. The main bilge pump failed. Emergency tank blowing proved insufficient. The boat tilted violently out of control and began a rapid, uncontrolled descent. The U-boat plunged to depths far exceeding its designed operational limits. 600 feet, 625, 650, 800, ultimately beyond 900 feet. The hull groaned and cracked, a sharp report like a pistol shot, then a hollow, strident singing. Rivets popped. Floor plates were flung upward. Glass shattered. A monstrous groaning howl, then a mad screeching. The infernal stench of battery gas filled the air. A high-pitched whistling signaled a water leak. The chief, the primary technical authority, issued critical orders, desperately assessing the boat's condition. "Boat out of control, can't hold her," he reported. The commander, Herr, exhibited a blend of decisive, often desperate action. Blow the tanks. Surface at once. Yet, even in this chaos, he maintained a strained attempt at outward composure, even employing sarcasm. The Bible scholar, a crew member, whimpered, resorting to religious pronouncements, representing the crew's spiritual and psychological devastation. Then, as if in a cruel psychological siege, enemy vessels arrived overhead. They performed a lap of honor, circling for a full 10 minutes. It was a sophisticated tactic, designed to break the will of the trapped crew, an intense psychological siege, rather than an immediate attack. This wasn't merely strategic warfare, it was a raw, visceral terror. The romanticized notion of submarine warfare as purely technical shattered under the reality of psychological breakdown. This was a fight for survival against overwhelming damage and external threats. The psychological impact on the crew was profound, paralyzing fear, disorientation, and a desperate struggle to maintain composure amidst chaos. The immediate assumption of a direct attack was secondary to the overwhelming reality of the boat's physical incapacitation and a descent. Survival, even in this crippled state, would be a testament to the commander's desperate gambits, the inherent, though severely tested, strength of the U-boat's construction, and perhaps a stroke of luck. Trapped at 900 feet, the U-boat was a crippled beast. The airplane attack had been precise, unexpected, initiating a cascade of damage. The chlorine gas from cracked battery cells and sulfuric acid made breathing noxious. Outboard plugs were leaking. The compass system, magnetic, gyro, and secondary, was ruined. Bilge pumps, the cold water pump, radio, engine room telegraph, all inoperable. The hydroplane was damaged. Bridging bars, essential for repairs, were insufficient, highlighting resource scarcity. The crazy crowd in Carnival, likely naval command, were, in the crew's minds, to blame. A disconnect between high-level strategy and the brutal reality faced by U-boat crews. A willingness to sacrifice expendable wonder boys for perceived strategic gains while neglecting critical repair materials. 20,000 marks apiece for torpedoes, yet only 5 marks worth of the stuff was needed for vital repairs. The passage of time became disorienting. A few minutes past midnight, then, it's 2 o'clock, only 2. The old man, despite his outward composure, was clearly overwhelmed. The chief, the central problem solver, meticulously and desperately attempted repairs. He represented the technical expertise and relentless effort to survive. Pilgrim, a subordinate, worked on dangerous repairs in the battery compartment. Tin Ear Willie, a symbol of crew suffering, highlighted the sensory deprivation and physical discomfort. The desperate, almost farcical quest for a small piece of wire to repair critical systems revealed the profound imbalance between expendable materiel and essential, seemingly unavailable, repair components. Then, the sonic signatures of approaching destroyers, an imminent threat. A heightened sense of danger that solidified the crew's desperate situation. The U-boat crew's experience offered proof positive of the British having a new effective electronic direction finder. This was a significant piece of intelligence that the crippled U-boat, its radio likely damaged, could not transmit. The lap of honor boys dash the attacking aircraft had demonstrated their lethal effectiveness, dispelling any notion of showy displays. The existential threat was real. The U-boat was hit, water poured in. The primitive Metox receiver, outdated technology, was probably part of the problem. Battery gas, with its danger of explosion, filled the air. Buoyancy cell 3 was compromised. Auxiliary pumps and compressed air were struggling. The U-boat, at 900 feet, was a coffin. The core thesis was now a visceral reality. The perceived safety of a submerged vessel had become a suffocating prison. The primal fear of being trapped and vulnerable overrode rational thought. The illusion of control was shattered. The crew was 51 bodies, flesh, bone, blood, spinal jelly, pumping lungs and racing pulses. Now they formed a desperate bucket brigade through the petty officers' quarters and the galley, passing buckets and pails to bail out the water. Zeitler, a petty officer, was grim and determined. The commander, the old man, made critical decisions. The chief oversaw repairs, diagrams spread out, the second engineer assisting. Morning light, at 07:300, was still hours away. The narrative now spanned from midnight to at least midday. The narrator had even lost his wristwatch. Physical sensations dominated. Pressure, gasping, breathing getting harder, a dull pressure inside the skull, a choking sensation. The visual of bananas hanging from the ceiling, over the sound room, quietly ripening, contrasted grotesquely with the disaster. The taste of rubber from the snorkel, hoarsely whispered directions and curses, a sharp gush and splash, croaks and whispers, the racket of survival, contempt and horror, despair, feverish eyes, hallucinations, the internal monologue dismissed, dulce decorum est pro patria, as crap. This was the unglamorous, visceral, and psychologically debilitating nature of facing certain death. By noon, a new phase of the ordeal began. Oxygen depletion became critical. Extreme measures were needed. Shallow breathing stillness, potash cartridges to filter the air, and snorkels, mouthpieces for breathing, were deployed. The constant threat of depth charges and unseen enemy vessels created pervasive psychological strain. The damage was extensive. Compressors, vital for blowing buoyancy tanks, had thumb-thick bolts sheared off. Both periscopes were in the ash can. Yet the sound gear, which was supposed to be a wreck, miraculously functioned, allowing for the detection of enemy propeller noises. An oil leak, a potential disadvantage, might now mask their location. The commander, the old man, a central figure of authority, showed resilience. He rolled his eyes like a tenant, enraged by a brawl in the apartment overhead when depth charges exploded in the distance. The chief, a key technical advisor, reported on damage and repairs. He seemed to gain hope as progress was made, despite his extreme exhaustion. Hermann, a technician, reported repairs were impossible with available materials. But Johann, working with a gigantic wrench, demonstrated calm under pressure. Pilgrim, an E-mate, assisted in the diesel room. Isenberg, the control room mate, staggered with exhaustion but continued his work, receiving encouragement from the old man. At 17:00 hours, ship's time, the narrator awoke from a period of deep fatigue. Was it morning twilight or evening twilight? Temporal orientation was lost. The U-boat was at 900 feet, a record depth. The oil-smeared faces and jumble of heavy machine parts in the diesel room depicted the scale of the internal damage. The bow compartment, described as a battlefield or the aftermath of a gas attack, was crowded and desperate. The commander observed how the oil emulsified and gradually disappeared. Viscosity, isn't that what they call it? This was the application of scientific principle to the raw fight for survival. The presence of oranges, 2 crates put aboard in the bow compartment, was a small detail of desperate comfort. This was a stark testament to the harrowing realities of underwater warfare, moving beyond strategic descriptions to the visceral experience of its participants. The glory of warfare was secondary to the raw fight for air and life. The struggle continued, a prolonged submersion in a confined, unsanitary environment. The smell of shit and urine, the gas from the battery, the rattling cartridge of the nose clip, the fetid air, water in the control room, all caused physical discomfort and profound psychological distress. Ominous stomach cramps, nausea, despair, hallucinations. The narrator noted, Losing my watch was a bad omen. The constant sensory deprivation led to mental fatigue, disorientation, and a blurring of reality. Daydreaming memory recall, the chilling fly hallucination. Past traumas resurfaced. The Rue d'Abakir brothel, a place of sweat, perfume, sperm, piss, and Lysol, where used condoms tangled up in the wastebasket. Duckstap training, a brutal Mayville Mickey Mouse of fatigue duty and rabbit hops. Fleming's death, a suicide by drowning. Obermeyer's suicide attempt over an affair with a half-Jewish woman. These images amplified current anxieties, contributing to a sense of impending doom. Frenson, a crew member, was completely exhausted, his spine no longer able to support his weight. His mouth was open, his glassy stare terrifying. He was going off the rails. The commander, the old man, grey and exhausted, uttered the words that shattered morale. "I'm sorry." This was a critical shift, from active hope to the acknowledgement of probable failure and despair. His face was a lifeless mask, his life seemingly drained. At 18:00 hours, Seidler's wristwatch was still visible. They had been submerged for almost 24 hours. Then, a desperate surge of hope. The chief, struggling to stand, hoarsely reported, "Compass system ready, echo sounder ready, engines ready." The system was ready. "In 10 minutes we take her up." The commander ordered, his voice urgent, despite the earlier despair. The water in the Papenburg column was sinking. The tower hatch was free. Escape gear, including waterproof packages, was prepared. The U-boat was rising. The successful surfacing was the ultimate turning point, a chance at survival against overwhelming odds. The narrative debunked the romanticized image of naval heroism, revealing the gritty, nauseating reality of life aboard a submarine under siege. It challenged the notion of unwavering stoicism, showcasing the internal struggles and near breakdowns of even strong individuals. Surfacing into the night, the U-boat was a traveling wreck. Its ribs were broken. It was wobbly as a hammock, unable to dive beyond periscope depth. The catastrophe at Gibraltar had crippled them. This damage was now the primary driver of all subsequent actions. The main cannon was gone. The fairing torn to bits. Engine trouble was constant. Their diesels were damaged, and they relied on limited battery power, creating a persistent threat of detection and immobility. The omnipresent enemy patrols, coupled with suspicions of advanced radar technology, dwarf radars, on enemy ships, created a suffocating threat. About an hour since we surfaced, the narrator noted, the escape from the Mediterranean had failed. Now, a perilous retreat. The decision to surface and run on a noisy diesel to escape was a critical, high-risk maneuver. They just missed hitting something. Depth charge attacks, 33, 34, 35, 36, 38, each a micro-turning point, reaffirming their precarious situation. At 21:30 hours, ship's time, they were still running. The Gibraltar disaster was a taboo topic, a silent, unspoken trauma among the crew. Despite having plenty of provisions and torpedoes, the boat's fundamental inability to dive rendered these resources less relevant for a successful return. The commander, the old man, was audacious, making often inexplicable decisions. His willingness to take extreme risks, even when the boat was clearly compromised, demonstrated a desperate resolve to achieve a mission or simply to survive. The navigator, overwhelmed, worked on chart and dead reckoning. The first watch officer, observant and pragmatic, often mirrored the narrator's anxieties. The second watch officer offered nervous humor. Seems to be as much traffic here as on the Wannsee. The chief, the highly dedicated engineer, was perpetually exhausted. One night, at 0320 hours, ship's time, a massive passenger liner appeared, a gigantic ship, filled to bursting. The U-boat's decision to engage was driven by a desire to fulfill their mission and by the commander's aggressive impatience. The radio man, Hinrich, signaled the liner. 5 minutes, the commander's initial ultimatum. But the first torpedo malfunctioned, its steering mechanism, perhaps ruined by a pressure wave from an earlier air attack, created uncertainty, forcing a reassessment of tactics. It revealed the vulnerability of their equipment. 2 or 3 minutes more were needed to get into position for the stern tube, then a new element of mystery. A small cutter, a dark blob, approached. Its occupants, shapeless creatures in old-fashioned kapok life jackets, shouted in a confusion of voices. They claimed to be Spanish. Their approach, their strange behavior, created immense tension, a moral dilemma for the commander. The first watch officer, incompetent in consulting ship's registers, only deepened the confusion. The Spanish captain declared, "Dos mil pasajeros por America del Sud Buenos Aires." 2,000 passengers for South America. He offered supplies in half an hour. But the navigator, Kriegbaum, cool and rational, sensed something was not quite right. The commander, prone to anger, was ice cold. The unmasking was pivotal. South Carolina was stenciled on a life jacket. The commander, fighting a monumental battle for self-control, was confronted with the potential for a horrific war crime. There would have been no survivors, he grimly pronounced. You have to wipe the slate whether you want to or not. The chilling imagery, lifeboats riddled by machine gun fire, arms thrown up, waves reddened by blood, faces filled with incredulous horror. Only dead men tell no tales. The revelation that the Spaniards were Americans in disguise, attempting to escape their own wartime vulnerabilities, fundamentally shifted the U-boat crew's perception of their supposed enemy. It exposed the complex, often blurred lines of wartime morality. The commander, his twisted grin, his initial aggressive stance, was tempered by the truth. His act of offering cognac to the bleeding American captain signified a complete reversal from potential executioner to host. The sheer chance of a torpedo malfunction and the omen of an air attack had saved 2,000 lives. This narrative challenged the stereotype of a cold, ruthless U-boat commander. Instead, it portrayed him as someone capable of intense anger, self-doubt, and ultimately, a complex moral reckoning. The encounter debunked the simplistic notion of clear-cut enemies, showing motivations and circumstances could be far more nuanced. The true enemy was often not a face, but the pervasive fear of enemy flyers and the desperate hope for moderately bad weather. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, the U-boat, still a traveling wreck, made its way towards La Rochelle, the Bay of Biscay, a naval graveyard. The brutal realities and psychological toll of submarine warfare were far removed from patriotic myth-making. The innate dangers and discomfort of submarine life, their boat was ready for the Ashcan, were constants. The psychological strain of prolonged patrols, separation from home, the looming threat of death, all heightened on this holiday. The plan was to surface, run on the diesel, and make it home. But at 0615 hours, the sound gear picked up submarine diesels. They were not alone. Then, a devastating impact. UXW hit by mine. The UXW, a sister vessel, was making water fast, unable to dive, magnetic mines. A new, devastating weapon. An unseen danger. A single bomb from a Halifax bomber finished the UXW. Then, almost an hour later, the cry, "Someone swimming over there." The navigator identified the lone survivor. Oberleutnant Bremer, the UXW's commander. A stark moment of humanity amidst the destruction. The old man, the commander, faced the grim decision of rescue in a minefield. This narrative challenged the idealized image of wartime heroism, presenting a more visceral and terrifying truth. Christmas Day, December 25th. The U-boat was still making its way home, but the expected single escort vessel was a horde of escort vessels. And then, the sky filled with aircraft, 5, 6, 7 bombers. It's an armada, a double-tailed lightning. A hornet swarm of bombers. The U-boat bunker, designed to withstand bombs of any size, was blasted open. 24 feet of solid concrete, blown to nothing. The entire harbor basin was ablaze, filled with black, oily smoke from hit fuel tanks. The devastating effectiveness of Allied air power against German submarines and port facilities was terrifyingly evident. The human cost was immense. The old man, streaming with blood, his sweater and shirt torn to shreds, was a visceral image of a leader wounded. Number 1, a figure of unexpected tenderness, provided blankets and cigarettes to a distressed stoker. The old man, gruff, but ultimately concerned, even expressed dark humor in the face of overwhelming odds. CORDIALEELCOME was one coded message exchanged. Another far more chilling. WATHAVEOUSUNK. The aftermath was chaos. Oil-slicked water filled with bodies. A slab of steel towering out of the water like a gigantic plowshare, the bow of the destroyed U-boat, its net guard, still attached. The narrative underscored the immense human cost of warfare, the psychological trauma of survivors. It implicitly critiqued the perceived futility and brutality of the conflict. The overwhelming power of the Allied forces undermined any lingering sense of German superiority. Any romanticized notions of submarine warfare were shattered by this brutal reality.